There is a famous saying attributed to St. Francis that is doubtless familiar to many of you. It goes something like this: preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. It leads a certain irony that I'm preaching on St. Francis Day. I was genuinely tempted to just stop there, and as I lost my voice 2 days ago, I'm still tempted. And invite you to reflect in silence for a time on the ways that you preach the gospel without words. And then, yes, use words to share that with your neighbour who'd like to do that instead of a sermon. No hands. Interesting. I thought that might be an interesting way to recall ourselves to the simplicity of the way of St. Francis. However, looking at Helen, I'm not quite sure it would fulfil my brief to be the preacher today. Well, St. Francis Day happens to fall on the liturgical calendar just after September, which is the month that we take time to celebrate the season of creation, as we've just done. That time when we turned to face climate change, the effects of which are transforming the world from the one we know and love to one that we will probably not recognise, and it's happening as we sit here. Climate change is the leading cause for concern for every single social issue that we as church have sought to address and relieve. The poor, the powerless, the disenfranchised are paying with their lives and their livelihoods the price of the world that we are disfiguring, outcome of our misuse, our overuse of creation. So into such a context, we are stepping St. Francis, a man who came to choose a life of radical simplicity and poverty, obedient to a very simple rule: to follow the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ and to walk in his footsteps. Francis soon had followers who wanted to walk this way, and fairly early on, probably a very canny move, he got papal approval for what was to become a religious order. Apparently the Pope had a vision, so there was a little bit of other things going on. Francis' way of life was not alluring, yet even today, his person and his way have profound influence. People from all walks of life are drawn to follow his example, to enact simplicity, to live more attuned to the life of creation. The Encyclopedia Britannica says something like this: probably no one in history has set out as seriously as did Francis to imitate the life of Christ and to carry out so literally Christ's work in Christ's own way. This is the key to the character and spirit of St. Francis, and it helps explain his veneration for the Eucharist and respect for those who handle the elements of the communion sacrament. So radical poverty, simple living, obedience to the institution of the Church, centrality of the Eucharist, a man who saw visions and sought to be obedient to the divine direction that came from those visions. Francis embodied simple dependence, trust in a creation, construed in such a way that as he aligned himself with the way of Jesus, that creation would provide for him. And this way brought to life. If you like, Francis lived a way of divine priority for creation. Of course, the accounts from Francis' life that are most remembered and loved are those of his communing with nature, of his relational engagement with the natural world, as genuine to him as his human encounters. Perhaps Francis lived within the real world, where humans understood they were interdependent in the living and breathing organism that is this planet Earth, delicately suspended, finely tuned to spin around a sun, part of a galaxy within galaxies. Did Francis know the science? Of course not. Not in the way we might now assert as being superior. But knowing more doesn't mean we are any wiser or any more able to have aligned with the world as it is. Knowing more might rather lead us to isolate ourselves from the living world around us. It might tempt us to create our own imaginary worlds with their own priorities. It might then mean that we, to sustain them, take what we want, when we want, as we see we think we need to, even if that perhaps threatens the world that actually is giving us life. You see, we seem to forget we can't continue to have and to take at will without repercussion. Francis chose to emulate the way of Jesus, a way that we happen to know led inevitably and inexorably to death. To live aligned with divine priority, with an intention to release life, to stand and speak against ways of being and doing that enact injustice, that destroy the potential for life and for full personhood, to live like that, according to the way Jesus did, is dangerous. For such living reveals how the powers and principalities retain their sway, how they have a vested interest in perpetuating systems that deny life's flourishing. What is more, what Francis showed us is that if you live simply, you live an amazing life. A life of fullness, a life of grace. Jesus died an ignoble death. The way the story is told, Jesus' death was actually one of noble. The means was ignoble, but his death was noble, and albeit written back, it had divine purpose. It reveals that through that death comes life. Through that particular death, the result of insisting with integrity for a life-bringing way of living, through that particular death comes a trail and a tale of abundant and ending of the power of death, life. So I want to take a chance here, and I want to wonder whether this way of death leading to life is actually the way and the shape of creation. Divinely intended creation coming into being, that is the way things we say are. Each of us is intended, each of us a creation that was intended by divine purpose. Each of us are unique, and we're invited to step into living that way and align ourselves with the life of this world to bring our life to the flourishing of the life in this world. We also surely know that we will die. Will our dying release potential beyond what has been known for the life of the world? Is there a pattern and a way of regeneration that is, if you like, in the DNA of the world? I want to illustrate with a story. It's a story, but it actually is from real life. And it's not a nice story. Halfway through, it's not very nice. Once, not so long ago, in a land far away, yet not so far from us, a revolution took place. It wasn't a revolution with war, but it was a revolution of change. And it became known as the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution couldn't succeed without more energy than that produced by fossil fuels. It required electricity. And electricity needed, or especially did back then, wires, lots and lots of copper wires. For 50 years, Jim Antel tells us, there was one mine in the US that produced 1/3 of the copper that the US needed and 1/6 of the copper the rest of the world needed. But in the 1940s, the price of copper plummeted and the mine closed. That way of mining became unprofitable. Then in 1955, a new form of mining happened. It was called open pit mining, and it emerged when the top of a mountain was blown off just outside Butte, or Butte it might be said, in Montana. A pit was formed there that is called the Berkeley Pit. It soon became the largest mine of its type until it was closed on Earth Day in 1982, because it was no longer profitable, I might add. It was closed for mining, but there was a problem. This enormous pit kept filling with rain and snow and groundwater. No one paid for the pumps to pump it out anymore. So a lake began to form. Not just any old lake, but a lake that was a dangerous brew of acids and metals from the ore that had been mined. It was a lake of copper and cadmium and arsenic and many others. Nothing could grow there. Life wasn't possible. The lake kept growing until its volume made it one of the largest lakes in the US. Then in 1992, on a stormy, wintry night, a flock of snow geese, over 300 of them, landed on the lake. For snow geese in a snowstorm, it was an obvious place to land, to slake their thirst, to rest, so to find food in the morning. But there was nothing normal about the lake, and the morning never came. During the night, locals heard a lot of loud honking, but by dawn the geese were silent. The first to the pit found the lake of floating bodies of geese. Long before the geese had landed, this lake had been deemed what is called a Superfund site. I didn't know what that meant. I will explain. It is land in the United States that is contaminated by hazardous waste and identified by the Environmental Protection Agency as a candidate for cleanup because it poses a risk to human health and/or the environment. That's halfway through the story. One day, a man wandered into the lab of two biochemists at the University of Montana, and he carried in his hand a stick with green slime on it. Doesn't sound too promising, does it? But he'd got the stick out of the lake. The professors were shocked. The slime was alive. It had adapted to the life-cancelling conditions of the lake. They called it an extremophile. Who knows what that is? An extremophile is a kind of life no one's seen before. And not long after that, these same biochemists came across a small pile of black slime. It was actually a yeast, and it had some incredibly special properties. Previously, few organisms had been found that actually consumed metals. For example, if you put algae into a beaker of this terribly poisonous pit water, the algae will consume 10 to 15% of the metals in the water. But this black slime, when you put it in, it absorbed 85 to 95% of the metals. They didn't know anything about it, so they went a worldwide search to find out if anybody knew about this black slime, this yeast. Finally, a vet got back to them. There's one place you can find that yeast, in the gastrointestinal tract of the snow goose. The 342 snow geese that had died had left a gift behind. A common yeast from their intestines had not only defied death in the acid bath, the yeast had thrived. Using the snow geese's gift, the scientists could help life to return to one of the most lifeless places on Earth. These geese, Jim Antel writes, had taken into themselves the very worst that humanity had to offer, and in dying had returned to humanity something that might actually restore the most forsaken and wounded corner of God's creation. Does that make the story any easier to bear? Maybe not. But I suggest that it might hint that the DNA of creation is for life. The biochemists, I might add, became famous for uncovering an extremophile and revealing the life-restoring properties of the yeast, even as both those life forms they uncovered and revealed were already present in creation. Is it too far a step to imagine from such discovery of the miraculous restoration of life from lifelessness that it is of the nature of creation, it is inherent to creation to heal, to evolve, so to restore wholeness and to regenerate life? I wonder if we have eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts and minds that are open to receive, that solutions to restore that which we are destroying may already exist. unbeknown as yet to us, regeneration may already be happening, may even be realizable, but, and this is a big but, not if we insist on imposing unsustainable expectations for life on the life of this planet. Francis lived simply, present to his world, open-hearted in his care and concern for all of the life of creation, aware of his interdependent place within God's good, life-bringing and evolving creation. Now, right now, is the time for us to relearn that we have place. Yes, we have a place as interdependent beings in and as part of this divinely breathed into life organism of creation. And we need to learn to take our part for it to flourish, for it to actually have a future.